This is Bigger Questions with your host, Robert Martin.
Welcome to Bigger Questions. Today's big question: is the Christian race worth finishing? Now, we usually record Bigger Questions before a live audience in Melbourne's CBD, but today our show isn't recorded before a live audience. Instead, I'm at St Luke's Anglican Church in South Melbourne. My guest today is Nick Hearnshaw. Nick has been vicar of St Luke's Anglican Church since 2006, although he is just about to retire and leave Melbourne. Nick also enjoys running at a local running club, music, and playing trombone. So Nick, welcome to Bigger Questions.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's great that you can join us. So Nick, you have a passion for running.
Yep.
What do you love about it?
Yeah, well, running was something that started probably at school, and I discovered I was quite good at it, without being the best of the best. And when I started running, I found this incredible sense of freedom, that you kind of run light and you leave a lot of your gear off and you sort of run around in singlet and shorts or whatever. and it was just a great feeling of being, especially the places where I was able to run, which were through forest trails and woods and things. And it was just a real feeling of being alive. So I enjoyed it for that reason, but I discovered that I was quite good, and there was a certain amount of self-confidence that built up because of that as well.
So how much running do you think you've done?
I did once try and add it up because I kept a running diary, but not probably for the first few years, and I think it's several 100,000 kilometres actually.
Wow, that's a lot of running.
Yeah.
I suppose that'd be pretty boring if you were just going around a track.
It'd be extremely boring. And in fact, I think even, say, Albert Park Lake, I could not possibly have done the miles that I could have done just running around the lake. And I mean, that's nearly 5 Ks. I just couldn't have done that.
Yeah, very good. Now, so what sort of distances? You've run several 100,000 kilometres in your life, but what sort of distance do you prefer to run?
Well, it's all changed. These days, 5 kilometres seems quite a long way.
Right.
But there was a time when you did feel it probably wasn't even worth putting your gear on if you were going to run less than about 15 or 16 Ks.
Okay.
I really enjoyed those 30 K type runs up through the forest, through the eucalypts. And seeing the odd animal, snakes as well, things like that. And I got a great buzz out of that. I don't think I ever got back from a run wishing I hadn't been.
Right. Wow, that's a good feeling. So you never got bored going on long runs?
No, I didn't. And I think sometimes your mind does other things. And I used to work out a few things that I wanted to say to people, or maybe to the
just a
congregation
to clear your head, so to speak.
Yeah, and so there was an element of debriefing and thinking through things. Yeah.
Now, Gabrielle Zevin once said, "There are many challenges to long distance running, but one of the greatest is the question of where to put one's house keys." So where do you put your house keys when you run?
That's a funny thing. In the old days, when you had shorts, you actually had to wear some support stuff under your shorts in the old days, and there was nowhere to put your key. But I used to get a safety pin and pin it on the inside of my thigh. So in fact, that is right. These days they come with support and pockets and things.
Oh, okay, proper running shorts.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I have the wrong shorts, perhaps. Yeah. Now, you enjoy running, and you've mentioned this before. There are many millions of people who enjoy running, but you're also quite fast. And I suppose that does add to the enjoyment, being able to run fast.
Yes, it does. And I don't really know how to explain that. It meant that for a lot of the time you can outrun people and get this real feeling of moving through the scenery and feeling the wind come through your face. Just the sheer feeling of going fast. Now I don't want to overstate that. I'm not an
You're not about to take
I've
off.
never been an Olympian.
Right. But you got reasonably close though, didn't you?
Well, not too bad. Yeah, my long distance times probably weren't too far off.
Yeah. Yeah. What was your fastest time?
My best time for the marathon was 2 hours and 23 and 10 seconds. That was in 1980.
Right.
And that was in a state championship in New South Wales, because in those days, really, if you ran long distance, your opportunity was generally with actual running clubs.
Right.
And so you tended to run state and national championships. So 2 hours 23, three times I got under 2:30, and that was a benchmark for me. If I didn't think I could get under 2:30, I didn't see any point in starting. My slowest was 2:39.
Right.
So,
that's pretty quick. I mean, if you'd run that time in the 1956 Melbourne Olympic Games, you'd have taken the gold medal. With a couple of minutes to second place. I mean, or even a silver medal in the 68 Olympics. I mean, how does that make you feel? That's a pretty hot time.
If I remember rightly, Emil Zetterbeck won the... Is that right? I think he won the 56 Olympics in Melbourne. I think he'd already won the 5 and the 10K. Right. But I certainly don't aspire to be quite his standard. But I think it's maybe a different era. The whole business of marathon running seemed to change in, say, 60 and 64 with the Ethiopian Abiba Bikila, and times really started to come down quite dramatically from then.
Yeah.
Mexico City, that was at altitude, and I think that might have affected the time. So I'd like to think I was close.
Right, but you weren't quite there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's it like when you finish the race?
There are sort of two things, I think. One is you can finish extremely satisfied and feel, that was something good, and I'm really invigorated by that. And that would happen even at the end of marathons to me sometimes. Sometimes you would finish and you were so absolutely exhausted, you say to yourself, I'll never in my life ever do another one of these again. But it's funny, your fitness really is more dependent on how you bounce back.
Right.
And, an hour later you might, you'll be tired, but you're feeling okay.
I could do that again.
Yeah. And I found generally that one of my successes was I generally seem to finish well in terms of long distances marathons. Yeah.
You had a bit of extra energy in reserve, perhaps?
Well, I did wonder sometimes if I'd probably given my all,
right.
But I'm sure I had.
So that's remarkable. So you had 2 hours 23, and you think maybe I could have gone a little bit quicker.
I remember that occasion very well because that was in Sydney, and yes, I did finish it. I was third. It was a state championship, and the winner had done, I think, 2:19. And second had done, he was only 25 seconds ahead of me, and I was catching him up like mad at the end. And I did cross the line thinking, gee, if I'd had more confidence and gone earlier, it might have been different. But you can't live with those sorts of regrets.
No. So what do you think then was your most satisfying race finish?
Probably that one, but also I ran a marathon in the ACT, and it was only the second marathon they'd run there. It was in 1977. I got these terrible stomach cramps halfway round and had to sort of deal with that. And I felt so much better at the end that I actually ran past the rest of the field and I actually won. That was 2:31, but that was really satisfying because I felt I was gone and I felt I'd had it, and in fact it turned out that I hadn't. I'd got a whole new lease of life.
So were you tempted to give up in that race?
Yeah, I wondered if I was going really to get to the end, but I'm fairly persistent. I would say I think my wife Ruth would say I'm a natural marathoner. I'm fairly persistent. I'm not generally a dropout. I did actually drop out of a race in Queensland once, and I was New South Wales state captain for that race, so it was a bit embarrassing. But I was really, really sick.
Right. And
I spent the rest of the weekend. But it turned out I got flu.
Okay, so that's a reasonable excuse, I suppose.
Yeah.
The classic British film Chariots of Fire told the story of Eric Liddell, the great Scottish runner. And Liddell says in the film that I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. Do you resonate with Liddell's comments?
Yeah, Eric Liddell's a real hero of mine, and I actually saw that movie, I think about 1982, the last year I ran a marathon. I understand exactly what he was getting at and running fast, and he's his life is just a remarkable example anyway. Eric Liddell.
Now, just as an aside, do you think that Liddell was right to not run on a Sunday?
I think that's a really hard one. I think it's hard to put ourselves in 1924 and how the world thought about things. For instance, when I was younger, if the national championship was on a Sunday, which happened occasionally, I must admit I did run it.
Yeah.
But yet I can see that his passion for his faith, his passion really for Jesus was so great that I really admire that. Was he right? Yes, I think he was right in the context of his time.
Well, and in some ways you could say, well, God rewarded him.
Very
he won the 400 metres, which he wasn't never expected to run and hardly ever run that distance before.
In a world record as well.
Not that necessarily God would necessarily have to reward him, but it was just an interesting...
But it was kind of a justification for the stand that he'd taken and the fact that he I mean, they thought that the 100 metres, or was it 200 metres, was a sort of laid down sort of gold medal, and I mean, he had to be faced with the idea that he was letting the country down.
And I think that was a lot of pressure for him.
And a huge pressure, but he said, well, I have to remain true to my faith,
Now, Little's comments raise the idea of purpose.
Yep.
He believed God made him for a purpose, so is there a greater purpose than running fast or long or for both?
Yes, I think there is a purpose, and it's interesting that in the New Testament, in the Bible there, that Paul sometimes actually uses the idea of running or sporting athletic activities to demonstrate the Christian faith, both in terms of looking after yourself physically, but in terms of longevity and keeping going right till the end, and the purpose and the finishing line and all that sort of stuff. And as you mentioned, I'm finishing... well, this phase of my life, which is a bit scary.
Yeah.
And, you want to finish well.
One of the other stars of Chariots of Fire, the character of Harold Abrahams in the film, said, "And now in 1 hour's time, I will be out there again. I will raise my eyes and look down that corridor, 4 feet wide, with 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence." Can running fast justify a person's existence?
I don't know. I obviously don't have the mentality of a sprinter. There are times when I think, the idea of having the whole thing over and done within 10 seconds may have a slight appeal down this corridor that Harold Abrahams was. The purpose of living is obviously much greater than being able to run fast and to justify your existence from that. There is a whole higher purpose. We're still on this earth to be physical human beings, and I think it's good if we can do that the best we can.
And sometimes people are being gifted with being fast. But I suppose also if you think that running fast, winning a race is the only way you can justify yourself, then only one person can ever get justified every 4 years, perhaps.
That's exactly right. And of course you read about those who reach those standards and wonder what they're going to do with the rest of their lives, and that's... that creates problems for them.
Now, as we've alluded to or mentioned already, the Bible points many parallels between running a race and the Christian life. But before we think about that, so Nick, can you tell us a bit about your Christian race? What convinced you to become a Christian believer?
I was brought up by Christian parents who'd themselves as adults changed their minds about the Christian faith and the place of Jesus. They'd come from, well, my mother in particular, from a home that was absolutely antagonistic to the Christian faith, and my father from a home that, well, was probably felt it was just an ordinary thing,
right,
and nothing really to get excited about. So I was brought up in that atmosphere of parents who would have said, it absolutely changed my life. It made such a total difference to my life. It changed the way I thought. It changed the way I lived. So I was brought up in that. So that means my starting point is a bit different from people who say, well, I was an atheist and I was convinced of the truth of the faith. But I guess as I got through school and teenage and had to stand up for myself, it was an increasing conviction that what Jesus had done for me was something that was really worth my responding to, and a conviction that this forgiveness, this restoration with God, was something that was worth taking on for myself. That God's grace, and grace is one of those sort of magic words which I think is probably not always terribly well understood, but yet it's that God actually loved me in Jesus, and I really wanted to respond to that. So I'd say that was the way I went during my years as a young person. I could never have imagined the idea of being a church leader or an ordained minister in those days. In fact, I think I think it's fair to say that at the time, if anybody suggested that to me, I would have been horrified.
Right.
My wife's best friend from many years ago came from England here, and she'd known me a little bit when I started going out with Ruth when I was in my 20s. And now, sort of in my mid-60s by this time, she said to me, "Nick, you're the last person that I could have ever imagined being ordained." And I thought, "Oh, what was wrong with me?" She said,
Right.
"I don't know, you were just the last person."
Right.
Yeah.
So growing up, you didn't just simply blindly accept the faith of your parents. You actually saw something attractive in Jesus. What was
Yes,
it
I did.
particularly about Jesus that attracted you to him?
It was his ability to really have compassion for people who were from all levels of society. It was his ability to maintain a sort of integrity in the face of huge opposition, and ultimately to give his life, and I guess ultimately for me. Now you're right in a way, because as a child you take on very much maybe promises or beliefs that your parents may put on you, but it was a sheer attractiveness of the person of Jesus and what he'd done for me, and the hope of that future. I mean hope. I don't mean hope in a speculative sense.
Yeah.
I mean a looking forward sort of hope that says there's something even greater than this. You can call it the hope of heaven if we like, but it's an eternity sort of that starts now and changes lives now. And I found that very attractive and also very, very real in terms of the way I live my life, and an eagerness for others to know that too.
Today's big question: is the Christian race worth finishing? And the Bible offers an answer. In the New Testament book of Hebrews, the author draws a parallel with the Christian life and running. He says in Hebrews 12:1, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." So, Nick, as a runner, how does that resonate with you?
That is absolutely terrific, and that's a really significant part of Scripture for me. I love the idea of stripping off every weight,
Yep.
and
finding a
we
place
talked
for your
about that
keys.
earlier, yeah, all that, yeah, place for your keys, and, place to put your tracksuit top or something.
So stripping everything off and...
Yeah, so I love that. And then the idea, here's a finishing line and that you're looking for. And the finishing line is actually a person in this case, because it's Jesus. And we keep our eyes on that because that's where we're going. And it's a bit like he's the starter and he's the finisher as well.
Yeah. Yes.
And I just like that as an image.
So why do you think the author describes the Christian life as a race?
Because I think there's a progression, and you have a start and you have a finish, and in the meantime you have your life to lead, and I think it's an ideal analogy really that the race is a time of progress, and ultimately you get to the finish line. You'd like to get to the finish line really well, and I think even in non-Christian circles we would probably talk about the race of life.
Race of life, yeah. So and you explained before that you loved the freedom that came from running. Do you have that same sense of freedom with the Christian race as well?
Yeah, certainly in terms of the Christian life, I think there's a huge freedom. I think it's actually a freedom sometimes to be able to think for yourself or to think God's thoughts rather than feeling that you've got to be tied into what the current trend is or what you read or see on the news. You know, this is the way people think these days, and I think it gives us that freedom not to be enclosed by the thinking of society in general or the culture that you happen to live in, but you can think outside that, and I find that a great strength. I find that very, very freeing. In fact.
Yeah. So in some ways there's similarities between the Christian life and running a race. Yeah. In another part of the New Testament, in the book of 2 Timothy, the Apostle Paul, who is near the end of his life, writes to his younger protege, Timothy, and he says, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." Here we see that Paul is about to die, where he says the time for my departure is near, and he says that he has finished the race. So how do you think he's feeling, Nick?
I think, having finished the race, I think it's a feeling of great satisfaction, I think, in having done what he's done as a true servant of Jesus Christ, that he's been commissioned as one who turned from being very opposed to the Christian faith. He's turned, and obviously his passion has been that people should understand who this Jesus is and why they should respond to him. And I think it would be a wonderful thing at the end of your life to be able to go back and say, yes, I finished the faith. I finished the race. I've kept the faith.
Yeah.
And I can actually look forward to the next bit.
Do you think that he would have been tempted to give up the race?
You would think so, wouldn't you? Because he often lists the times when he was opposed and stoned and all sorts of things like that,
yeah.
Persecuted generally. My human instinct says, yes, he must have been tempted. But as I read the New Testament, he just seems to be totally undaunted. He just says, I have this passion. I just have to do this. I don't care what it costs. Even if it costs my life, I've just got to go and do it.
Almost like having stomach cramps in a marathon race. You just got to keep going.
Yeah, probably a little bit more, but yes, indeed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Paul then goes on to say, "Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." So, Nick, what's the reward then for finishing the Christian race?
I think the reward for finishing the Christian race is to be part of God's new creation.
Is this crown of righteousness that he talks about?
Yes, it's interesting, crown of righteousness, because that's probably not the sort of language that we would use today.
No.
But it seems to me that we're talking about a future in God's new creation, and in various other places in the Scriptures, it's the writers talk, or Paul himself talks about the idea of new bodies and new creation, and the whole redeeming of creation generally, and an opportunity to be part of that. And I think I would see this as a reward. Now, it's interesting because I think in our natural human way of thinking, can think, well, Paul obviously did a lot more, so his reward's greater, whereas somebody might have turned to Christ late in life, and yet I just don't think that's how God thinks of things. Well, that's what the reward is for all.
Well, that's what this passage says, that he has a crown of righteousness not just for me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. And so the same reward is given to anyone who follows Jesus.
But the righteousness is the thing that of course we get from Christ, because we're obviously not naturally very righteous.
Yes.
And righteousness is one of those words that I think we think of in human terms as being well behaved. But in fact, since none of us can really reach that standard, it's ultimately what Jesus has done for us. That's what it's about.
So in some ways, the Christian race is not one that I have to have earned myself by my own self-discipline and training, etc. Whilst there's an element of that in the Christian life, it's actually not the way. That's not the reason that we get the prize.
No, and no extra rewards for having run a marathon in 2:07 or having run a marathon in 6 hours. I mean, that's
you finish, and you get the prize, which is the crown of righteousness. And the story of the Tanzanian athlete John Akawari in the 1968 Olympic Games inspires many. He injured his knee when competing in the marathon, and he entered the stadium more than an hour after the winner. Bloodied and bandaged, he struggled to the finish line. When asked why he had not given up despite the obvious pain he was feeling, Akawari replied, "My country did not send me 7,000 miles away to start the race. They sent me 7,000 miles to finish it." It's an inspiring story.
Isn't it?
How do you react to that?
Isn't it? Well, I think my reaction at the time, because I actually saw that.
Right.
And I saw him finishing, and as a marathon runner, and I think probably I was even... was an active marathon runner at the time? I think I might have been. And I thought, that guy's done himself an immense injury, by keeping going. But yet the inspiration is very much in the words that he used, wasn't it? That I actually came to finish. And I think there's a huge admiration in that. And I think that certainly correlates to the Christian faith, that whatever may come on the way, we're here to finish, not just to start.
The prize at the end, this crown of righteousness, do you think it's going to be worth the run?
Yes, I think it is very much going to be worth the run. And the idea of having a relationship with the Creator and with one from really who is the source of love. Yes, I think absolutely. But I suspect it's rather more than what I think Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians about chapter 2, rather more than we can imagine. And I think that's the thing. I think some of the pictures that people have of some sort of resurrection life, I think sometimes they're a bit limited by our human thinking.
So, Nick, is the Christian race worth finishing?
I'm sure the Christian race is worth finishing, and I'm sure the rewards are great, and the satisfaction of having run well are an important part of the Christian life. And I would certainly suggest the Christian race is worth finishing, but I'd also say that it's worth joining in and being part of, and really responding to it now. There's this thing that the Bible calls joy, which I think is often a little bit absent in the world, and again not very well misunderstood. But there's that, I think, in living the Christian life, which means that we can do that actually from the starting line. We don't just have to duck in before the finish.
And you experience that joy?
Yes, I think so. It's not the same as happiness. It's happiness, I think, is generally a fairly circumstantial thing. Joy is something that I think is deep-seated. Yeah, I'd say joy. I'm very, very satisfied with how life has been, and some of it's been tough.
And where are you going?
Are you talking about now
or the future? Sorry, in terms of the joy of the crown of righteousness.
And
I hope that you talked about before.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and that's something. So we don't have to regret. We can look forward. I understand, where Paul says, "For me to live is Christ, to die is gain," and that was his idea, wasn't it? That there was something good about the future as well.
Let me leave you with the Bible's answer to the big question: is the Christian race worth finishing? From 2 Timothy 4, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." I look forward to you joining us next time for Bigger Questions. Many thanks to our guest today, Nick Hearnshaw.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Enjoy Bigger Questions? You can help us keep asking them for as little as $1 a podcast. Support the show. Go to patreon.com/biggerquestions.